Sup folks, welcome to the part 14, of What If Deku Become a Healer Hero, Chapter 37. Izuku dreams of jagged spikes plunging into his chest and jerks awake with scarlet eyes still seared into his mind. He shoots upright in his bed, panting heavily and drenched in sweat. For a few long moments, he simply stays there, trembling and clutching at his sheets, staring at his walls and struggling to remind himself that he's fine, that he's safe. He's not there anymore, he's at. His walls are not the brick walls of the bar, they're the smooth, painted walls of his dorm. He's safe, he's protected, and he's surrounded by his friends, his heroes, not villains. Izuku swallows, mouth feeling dry, and grabs the glass of water on his nightstand. Having been woken up by his nightmare, Sushi appears at his side, and he scoops up his cat and holds him close to his chest. His familiar weight is comforting, and Izuku tries to go back to sleep for about 2 minutes before realizing that it's not going to happen. With a heavy sigh, he gets up, turns on the light, goes to his desk, takes out a medical book, and starts to read. Sushi curls up on his lap and stays with him as the next couple of hours tick by slowly. Exhaustion pulls heavy on his bones and he knows the bags under his eyes must be getting noticeable by now after a week of such little sleep. He rubs at them, trying to get some moisture under his dry eyelids, and lets out a tired sigh. Sushi meows, the sound loud and cutting in the pressing silence of the room, and Izuku scratches behind his ears. "I'm alright," he murmurs. "The others will be up for breakfast soon enough. They're going to jump right into training today, so they're starting as early as any regular school day." It's a bit jarring, going right back into it with such little time to adjust to their new lives, but there's a lot they need to catch up on if they want to be ready for their provisional license exam. Izuku keeps reading until the light of early dawn starts peeking through his windows. When it's finally an appropriate time, he gets dressed and heads downstairs for breakfast. In class, Aizawa talks more about the exam itself and explains that they'll need to develop 2 ultimate moves to help them pass. He brings in Midnight, Ectoplasm, and Sypnosis to assist him, and tells everyone to change into their costumes and meet in Gym Gamma to train. However, as the students file out of the classroom, Aizawa stops. "Izuku." "Not you," he says. Kaken shoots Izuku a look and starts to linger, but the freckled boy waves him off and he continues following his classmates. Izuku turns to his teacher, tilting his head questioningly. "It's going to be entirely quirk-based training, so there won't be anything for you to do there," Aizawa says. "Shouldn't I be on standby for injuries then?" Izuku asks. "If they're going to be trying new moves, it might get dangerous." "That's why we have 4 teachers," Aizawa says pointedly, "plus however many clones ectoplasm creates." He pushes Izuku's forehead with a finger. "You need to focus on your own license exam." Izuku blinks slowly. "My own?" His brain short-circuits. "I think I can pull some strings and have you do the license exam in the beginning of your 2nd semester. Oh shit. His license exam. How could he have forgotten? With everything that happened he forgot that recovery girl had said that. Shit, he didn't realize it was so soon. When is it exactly? Did she say? He can't remember. Despite his sudden anxiety, excitement also bubbles in his chest, vibrating alongside the cluster of nerves. So close. He's so close to healing all might. A grin breaks out across his face and he beams up at Aizawa. The man squints and glances away. "What, did you forget?" He grunts. "Yeah, actually," Izuku admits sheepishly, scratching the back of his head, "I've kinda had a lot going on." An indecipherable expression passes over Aizawa's face and he presses his lips together before he sniffs. "Yeah, well, go on then, don't keep recovery girl waiting. We'll see you back at the dorms." He gives Izuku a nudge and the boy spins around, dashing down the hallway excitedly. "Bye, Aizawa-sensei," he calls over his shoulder. "Don't run in the hallway." Izuku huffs but reluctantly slows down. When he gets to the infirmary, He's hit with an odd wave of nostalgia. It feels like it's been ages since he's been in here. Recovery Girl is waiting for him and greets him with a warm hug. She asks him how he's settling in and he says he's fine, everything's great, and he's trying not to sound too impatient, but from the unimpressed look on her face he can tell that he's failing miserably. Finally, he blurts out, "When is my exam?" "You said the beginning of second semester, right? Is that like a general, within the first few weeks beginning, or, like within the first few days beginning?" He bounces on his toes eagerly. Recovery Girl doesn't respond right away. She gazes at him with her lips pressed in a thin line, wrinkled eyes narrowed in a way that makes him feel like he's being analyzed. When she does finally speak, her voice is firm. "Listen to me." He goes still. She pauses and takes a deep breath through her nose. "I managed to convince the board to test you on the same day as your classmate's license exam. That means in 10 days. His eyes widen as his heart leaps to his throat. "That soon? I had planned this as soon as you were able to stop your quirk. Before the mall, and before Kamino." Izuku swallows, the scarred muscles of his throat feeling tight. He remembers that week. Everything had seemed to spiral out of control so quickly afterwards. He had been so happy to gain control of his quirk, but then Kendo had gotten injured, and then not a week later Shigaraki had attacked him, and then Kamino. Recovery Girl gives him a stern look. "I want to make this very clear. I was very tempted to cancel it, and I still am, but I know you, and I know that you would benefit more from something to focus on rather than being coddled even further." Izuku lets out a gust of air, shoulders sagging. "Thank you, Recovery Girl," he rasps, gratitude filling every inch of his ragged voice. What did he do to deserve a mentor like her? "But I don't want you to push yourself, all right, young man?" Recovery Girl says, "Any studying and training you do for the exam will be done with me. I don't want you rushing and going overboard like I know you do." "Yes, ma'am." Izuku nods obediently. "I mean it," she warns, "I'll set Aizawa-san on you. He better not catch you cracking open a medical book at 1 a.m. Izuku's eyes widen slightly. Crap. How did she know? Coughing awkwardly to cover up his surprise, he stammers, I won't." Recovery Girl narrows her eyes suspiciously. Suddenly feeling rather self-conscious about the dark circles under his eyes, he changes the subject and asks how the license exam will go. Much like the recommendation exam, the healer provisional license exam is a large test with 2 parts, a written portion and a physical portion. The written portion will contain a wide variety of questions ranging in levels of difficulty and, since he's a high school first year, he's not expected to know all of it. He just needs to answer enough questions correctly to give the board an idea of his level of knowledge. The physical portion will involve a few volunteer patients arriving from the hospital with minor injuries. Recovery Girl wants him to demonstrate the control that he has over the flow of his energy, so the plan is that he will first use his quirk to fully heal one person's wound, then for the next he'll stop halfway, then heal the next one slowly. Even though it feels like he's come so far, now that it's come time to present his accomplishments, it sounds like almost nothing. Recovery Girl chastises him and tells him that when he came to he had no control over his quirk and that he's made an incredible amount of progress in such a short amount of time. "We need to be sure to emphasize that to the board," she says. "We'll tell them what your goals are for what you want to achieve with your quirk, and how you want to gain better control of it. We need to make them believe just as much as I do that you can achieve those goals." "My goals?" Izuku murmurs. His mind wanders back to the list of goals he and Recovery Girl made earlier on in his training. 1. Be able to touch someone without automatic quirk activation. 2. Learn how to control the speed and output of his energy. 3. Be able to slow down or completely stop his quirk before an injury is fully healed, therefore helping him save as much energy as he can. 4. Figure out how to direct his energy to specific injuries so that they're healed first. He's only accomplished number 3, and sort of number 2, he supposes. He did do number 4, but only once, and that was when he was healing All for One. Izuku swallows and tries to suppress a shudder. It's so hard to think of the man, just the mere memory is usually enough to send him into a panic, so he's been doing his best to avoid letting his thoughts wander to All for One. The only time his mind succumbs to the villain is during the night when he torments him in his dreams. But now, as he starts to fall into the steady rhythm of working alongside Recovery Girl once more, he lets himself think. Not of All for One, but of his own quirk. How it felt when he forced it, looking past the pain and discomfort, and instead focusing on how his energy felt thick and sludge-like. Tangible. He could grab it, direct it, and he did. That's not something he could ever do when he lets his energy flow naturally. It slips through his grasp like water, and he can't imagine ever thinking of a way to change that. This way of directing his energy, this is something he already did, so he already knows he can do it, it's just. Recovery Girl said not to do it again. And it's bad for him, he knows that, it felt awful to do. But he just can't help being curious about it now that he thinks about it. Actually, the fact that he can force his quirk while he's injured is a useful piece of information. Of course, he'll avoid doing it, but just knowing that he could, at least, in the case of an emergency. He wonders how his injuries would affect his output of energy. When he was healing All for One, he definitely noticed that he was draining a lot, faster than he would have if he wasn't injured. All for One said he only had a certain amount of energy to give at a time before he succumbs to quirk exhaustion. He also needs to take into account the size differences between him and whoever he's healing. Someone bigger than him like All for One or All Might that's gravely injured would need to be healed in multiple sessions simply because he doesn't physically produce the same amounts of energy as they do. But the same wouldn't apply for someone that's smaller than him, right? He might even have a surplus of energy. Could he force extra energy into someone? What would even happen? Would it make them extra healthy? Give them a strength boost? No, that one wouldn't make sense. Would their bodies even accept it? It makes him think of filling a balloon so much that it bursts. Probably not a great idea to try, but it does make his mind wander to the opposite. He thinks of the way All Might's missing organs felt, the empty voids of missing energy, like an eerie chasm contrasting drastically to the warm life around it. It's the same way All for One's eyes felt before he healed them, before he forced his energy and filled those empty pockets with life once more. And it makes him think. If he were to force his energy into a smaller body, maybe one without energy at all, could he bring them back to life? It seems impossible. It has to be impossible. Izuku knows his quirk is powerful, but the implications of that. It makes him dizzy just to think about it. The faint ache in his bones draws him back to reality. He shakes his head. It doesn't matter anyway. Forcing his quirk isn't a viable option because it's not like he can test it or train with it anyway. Not when it has such a negative drawback, one that he's still trying to recover from over a week later. He needs to be well enough to use his quirk for his license exam, and then to heal All Might, and then to heal all the students he heals on an everyday basis. Forcing his quirk felt horrible and there's too much of a risk involved. He can still do it if he needs to in an emergency, but he'll find another way to direct his flow of energy. His first day of training ends in the late afternoon. Thankfully, none of his classmates come in for any injuries, nor do any other hero students. Part of him wonders if any of the upperclassmen are training as well, and he makes a mental note to ask Mirio later. Only a couple of support students come in for minor injuries, so he doesn't get to practice with his quirk much, but Recovery Girl spends most of the day reviewing diagnostic procedures and equipment with him. Even though he doesn't use his quirk, he's still pretty exhausted by the time he goes back to the dorm, both from lack of sleep and the amount of information stuffed in his brain. His classmates are still on an adrenaline high from their training. After showering, Izuku goes down to the lounge to see a bunch of them sprawled out on the couches, chatting animatedly about their ultimate moves. The greenhead smiles when they greet him and moves to sit next to Shinsu, more than content to just curl up by his mellow friend's side and listen to the others as they ramble on about their day. Kaken, unsurprisingly, had no trouble coming up with multiple ideas for an ultimate move on just the first day of training. Sero complains loudly at how easy it is for a guy with a quirk like his, which leads to Uraraka reassuring him that he'll figure out an ultimate move soon. Izuku lets out a sigh, leaning slightly against Shinsu, but then, something Kirishima says catches his attention. And I was surprised when All Might showed up. Izuku blinks. What? Yeah, he actually gave some pretty good advice, Uraraka says, not that he usually gives bad advice, but, you know. Wait, what? Izuku rasps. His friends glance over at him. He shouldn't be fighting, he's still recovering. His mind wanders back to the last time he saw the hero earlier in the week during the home visits. He swears if All Might thinks he can jump right back into fighting before he's even finished shaking off the last of his injuries. Oh, don't worry, he wasn't fighting. Uraraka reassures him. Yeah, I don't think he was even supposed to be teaching today, Kirishima adds. He said he showed up cause he was bored. Izuku pauses. Well, that does sound like something All Might would do. He's probably gotten a bit restless over the past week. Aizawa-sensei won't let him lift a finger while he's injured, Shinsu says beside Izuku, then he smirks. Cause he knows you'd kill them both if he did. Izuku's lip twitches and looks away innocently. I don't know what you're talking about. Shinsu snorts. The others continue talking for a few more minutes while the rest of their classmates slowly trickle into the room, having taken their own showers and changed out of their training clothes. Izuku tries not to immediately focus his attention on Todoroki when he walks into the room and instead concentrates on the conversation at hand, but it's really hard to ignore the boy when he decides to sit right next to him. Izuku ignores the flutter of his heart and carefully wiggles just a bit closer to Shinsu. Thankfully, his purple-haired friend either doesn't notice or is too tired to care. After about 20 minutes of general chatter, the conversation eventually turns into Class 1A trying to figure out what to do for dinner. With the chaos of moving in, everyone was kind of scattered around, so they all kind of just ended up doing their own thing for dinner yesterday, but tonight is their first of many nights to come eating together as a class. They've done it before during the summer camp, but now they're going to have to get used to figuring out how to successfully feed a large group of teenagers on a daily basis. While it's tempting to just have everyone cook for themselves, I don't think even this kitchen is quite big enough for 20 teenagers to be cooking individual dinners in every night, Ojiro says, glancing at the kitchen apprehensively. A few people reluctantly mutter their agreements. Perhaps we should make a rotation of some sort? Yaozu suggests, taking charge as class rep. I'm sure we'll have to do that for most of the shared chores, but for cooking especially, so that no single person does more than their fair share. An excellent idea, Yaozu-san. Ida says enthusiastically, then pauses. However, I'm sure that some people may not be as, well, gifted in the art of cooking as others. Shinsu coughs into his elbow. Glaring lightly, Ida ignores him and continues, what shall we do about that? Can't have anyone dying from food poisoning, Shinsu supplies, helpfully. Yaozu considers this. Then maybe we should do the cooking in pairs? That way a more experienced cook can partner up with a less experienced cook and teach them. Plus, it would be safer to have 2 people in the kitchen rather than have one person cook alone in case there's an emergency. The idea seems to go over well with their classmates. Izuku raises his hand. Kaken's good at cooking, he volunteers his friend, despite already knowing how this is going to end. Kaken whips his head around to glare at him. Fuck you, I'm great at cooking. Izuku rolls his eyes, but I'm not gonna waste my time teaching these losers how to do it. Hey! Kaminari exclaims. Meanie. Ashido pouts. Kaken, Izuku says with a disapproving tone. He still manages it pretty well despite his weak voice. I couldn't even teach you how to cook, Kaken says snippily. How do you expect these morons to do any better? Hey! Kaminari exclaims again. Yo, I'm crying a bit here. Ashido puts a hand to her chest in only somewhat mock offense. Kirishima raises his hands before Kaken can retort. Hey, alright now, he says, Yarazu-san, Ida-kun, that's a great idea, but you know what, we never went out to eat yakiniku last night. How about we do that instead? I did promise to treat you guys, after all. Izuku and a few others perk up at the idea. Sounds better than cooking, Sero says. Hell yeah. Yoraraku fist pumps excitedly. Free food. Guess I'd rather eat that than whatever garbage you extras would make, Kaken grumbles. But Ida sputters, flailing his arms. Cooking is a task we will need to accomplish daily, and we need to start becoming accustomed to our new lives. We can start tomorrow, then. Shinsu shrugs, unconcerned. If it bothers you that much, then consider this a group bonding exercise. Ida looks like he might want to protest, but when the others express their enthusiasm, resigns himself with a sigh. Even Yarazu's eyes are sparkling with excitement. Izuku smiles, a little thrill going through his chest as he's swept up in the high of his friend's bubbly emotions. This'll be fun. He pipes up, I'm pretty sure there's a yakiniku place not far from Hero. A thought crosses his mind. I think we have to turn in a permission form in order to leave campus first, though, but that shouldn't be too hard. The chatter ceases. Everyone pauses, and then 19 pairs of eyes land on him simultaneously. His heart gives a nervous flutter. What? There's a long pause, and then Ashido suggests, or we can just order. Murmurs of agreement immediately ripple through his classmates. Yeah, that's better. Let's do that. I'm down to stay in. Much easier anyways. As their words filter through his ears, the familiar sharp claws of anxiety sink into his gut. He presses his lips into a thin, bloodless line, apprehension pricking his heart. What's going on here? They're all glancing at him nervously, eyes darting quickly and then looking away. Unease swirls within him, along with confusion. Don't you want to go out? He presses, gazing at Kirishima imploringly. The redhead straightens up, as if startled, and shakes his hands. Oh no, it's alright, let's just stay in, he says, giving him a forced smile. We're all pretty beat from training anyways. The others jump in right away. Oh, yeah, I'm super tired. Way too tired to go to a restaurant. Let's just order dinner and watch a movie or something. Yeah, it's a lot less complicated, and we won't have to bother any teachers with the permission forms. Besides, it's not like your permission form would get approved anyways, dude. Sero hisses and elbows Kaminari in the ribs to shut him up. The electric blonde yelps and shrinks under the glares of his classmates, but Izuku heard his comment loud and clear. His permission form? Why wouldn't his own? The remnants of the warm, cheerful mood seem to be extinguished instantly as cold reality washes over him. His throat tightens. Well, no. It should be alright, shouldn't it? It's not like he's going alone, or even very far. He's not breaking any rules by going to a restaurant with his friends, right? The room has gone silent, making it so that the footsteps approaching behind him are the only noticeable sound. His classmates' eyes are drawn above his head, and when the footsteps come to a stop, Izuku glances over his shoulder to see Aizawa gazing down at him. His expression is carefully blank and he doesn't say anything, but his dark eyes are analyzing, watching for a reaction. The air has shifted, twisting into something tense, as if everyone is holding their breath, Izuku included. And he doesn't understand. It shouldn't be that big of a problem. All he needs is a hero escort, right? Well, he has one right here, and he has 19 heroes in training on top of that. How could he be any safer? Sure, they may have thought the same about the other 2 times, but oh. His breath hitches. After a moment, Izuku tries to swallow, but it gets caught in the hard ball that has suddenly formed at his throat. His skin prickles under the gazes of his classmates and he doesn't like this. He doesn't like the way they're looking at him. Their eyes, they're full of pity, Unable to stand it, he looks away and meets Aizawa's piercing gaze instead. No more mistakes. Dread creeps in like an icy chill. Oh. Am I not allowed to leave? His voice is small, weak, resigned. He already knows the answer. There's a long, tense silence in which Aizawa doesn't respond, his dark eyes boring into Izuku's green ones. When he does speak, his words come out slowly, like he's still trying to figure out what to say. It's not that you aren't allowed to leave at all, it's just. Aizawa lets out a soft sigh through his nose. Not for things like that. Not for eating at restaurants, or mall trips, or grocery runs, or things like that. If you're going to leave, it needs to be for something important. He looks at Izuku, solemnly. And we need to be careful about it. His voice is gentle, but firm, and leaves no room for discussion. Izuku nods slowly, numbly, and clenches his jaw in an attempt to force away the tears that burn at the edges of his eyes. Blinking rapidly, he ducks his head and lets his long curls hide his face, gripping his pants tightly as he tries to swallow down the frustration rising in his throat like bile. A hand drops on the back of his head and he squeezes his eyes shut, but it only ruffles his curls once before leaving, the footsteps fading away with it. He lets out a shaky exhale, struggling to control the emotions swirling within him. He can't leave? He can't leave? Nobody told him about this. This is too far. He knows they want him to be safe, but they're basically taking away his freedom. He's a teenage boy, he should be allowed to go out with his friends and have fun. All for One is gone, and yeah, the League of Villains is still out there, but why does that mean he has to be trapped here? They're treating him like he's some sort of endangered species that needs to be put in a cage for its own safety. But this isn't safety, this is more like being told you're moving to a new home and then finding out you're actually being kept prisoner. That's pretty much exactly what happened. How do they expect him to live like this? So, Kirishima's voice sounds muffled in his ears. I guess I'll order the food then. His classmates murmur their agreements, still glancing at Izuku in concern, but the Gurinet doesn't respond. He stares down at his lap unseeingly, fist clenched. A familiar, sickening feeling laps at his stomach like a wave, making it churn with nausea. It's a feeling that's tormented him all throughout his life, but he never thought his friends, his heroes, would one day be the cause of it. Helplessness. Everything is just so messed up. He's completely lost the life that he once had. He can't do anything that he used to do. From now on, his every action is dictated for him. Someone else will decide where he's allowed to go and why he's going and whether or not his reason to go is good enough. None of it is up to him anymore. And it makes indignation burn in his chest. Why isn't it? Why do they get to decide these things for him? Why is his safety their responsibility? He never asked for this. Have you ever actually had a choice in anything? Shigaraki's voice purrs in his mind. Izuku shakes the memory away immediately. Stop it. But another one chases right after it. All for One's voice rumbles. Healing quirks are already so rare to begin with, but once someone is born with one, their life immediately belongs to the heroes. No, it's not that. It's not like that. They don't see him as a possession. That's not why they're doing this. The villains took him because they saw him that way, but the heroes, Izuku knows they're just doing this because they care about him. He doesn't belong to them in the way Shigaraki was trying to manipulate him into thinking he was, but he does belong to them in some way, just like how they belong to him too. They're his heroes, and he's their healer. Of course they're going to be even more overprotective now. Why does he still act like he's surprised? It's just something he has to keep getting used to. And he shouldn't act like he's not grateful for the security anyways. He shouldn't act like he doesn't have nightmares about being kidnapped again every single night. So why does he feel this way? He should feel safe. He does feel safe. He knows he knows there's no safer place than where he is right now, but still it isn't enough. He still had a nightmare last night, even though he's safe, even though there's literally no way anyone could lay a hand on him. God, he's so tired. What's wrong with him? Why is he so selfish? His heroes are trying to protect him, but all it's doing is making him feel trapped. Why can't he just be okay? Despite the turmoil of emotions inside of him, he's strangely numb all throughout dinner. His friends try to keep the mood bright and engage him in conversation, but he stays quiet, half-heartedly picking at his food and not quite tasting it. After about 10 minutes of this, he finally gives up and excuses himself, ignoring his friends' protests as he retreats into his room, buries himself under his covers, and promptly falls asleep. The next morning, Izuku decides to go on a run. A couple of things prompt this idea. The first one being that he was woken up by a nightmare, which is unfortunate, but at this point, unsurprising. The second being that, since Recovery Girl doesn't want him to study outside of training hours, he can't pass the time by reading his medical books anymore. Well, technically he could, but his mentor has a way of finding things out and he doesn't want to risk pissing her off and making her cancel his exam. Besides, he's not too keen on putting in even more hours of studying today. So that leads him to where he is now. It's 4:45 a.m., and Izuku is in the lounge dressed in leggings and a light jacket, taking the time to stretch as he waits for the next 15 minutes to pass. If he recalls correctly, students are allowed to leave the dorms between the hours of 5 a.m. and 7 p.m., so this should be okay, right? It's not like he's leaving campus. Once the clock hits 5 a.m., Izuku quietly opens the front door and slips out. Since it's so early, the sky is still dark outside, with only the palest hints of light just beginning to breach the edge of the horizon, and the air is cool and damp. As Izuku starts up a brisk jog, a hulking figure in the distance catches the edge of his vision. Hound Dog. The Kanya teacher's yellow eyes glint in the low light as they land on him and Izuku tenses up, stopping. For a moment, he's certain he's about to get in trouble, but then Hound Dog huffs and glances away, continuing on with his patrol. Izuku lets out a sigh of relief and starts up his jog again. It's a quiet morning. Rather strange to see the usually busy campus so empty. He goes to a smaller track field next to one of the gyms and runs there. On the start of his second lap, he catches sight of ectoplasm. It's just a glimpse as he runs by, but it's clear that the teacher is watching him. He doesn't spot him again when he passes by the second time, though. Izuku huffs. They're just doing their job, he tells himself. They're just worried about him, just watching over him. That's what he wanted, isn't it? That's what Enku always wanted for him. To join the world of heroes as a healer. To have their protection. It's part of their symbiotic relationship. He knows this. The healers heal the heroes and the heroes provide protection for them, he knows this. He shouldn't be mad at his friends or his teachers for doing their job. It's not their fault he doesn't know his place. A bitter taste fills his mouth. He sighs. It wasn't this hard before. But if there's anyone he should be mad at, it's the villains. They're the ones who messed up everything. And they're still messing up everything even though they lost. The cool morning air whips past him as he runs. The sting of it, against his skin coupled with the rush of physical exertion helps him shake off the remnants of sleep, but despite this, the ever-present exhaustion that weighs down his bones still remains. Izuku can't even tell what it's from at this point, forcing his quirk or lack of sleep. All he knows is that he's tired, so tired. And he's so tired of being tired. He wants to be better already. He doesn't want to be scared at night anymore. It's so stupid. He was rescued, he's safe, why can't his brain get the message? Even though he was saved, Izuku feels like he still hasn't escaped sometimes. And now it's in more ways than one. Sure, he's not being held captive by the villains anymore, but all he did was get shoved right back into another place that he can't leave from. He's either trapped by the villains or trapped by the heroes. The thought immediately brings a wave of guilt along with it. Inhaling deeply, he lets out a frustrated groan as he exhales and pours on speed. For a few minutes, he doesn't let himself focus on anything except for running as fast as he can. It's only when his legs are burning and his lungs feel like they're about to burst does he finally start to slow down to a steady pace. But it will get better, he tells himself firmly. It sucks now, but that's just because there was a big battle and the League of Villains got away and everyone's just a little bit on edge. But once some time passes, people will start to calm down. Surely when the League is stopped, the heroes will relax around him? Maybe he won't regain his freedom completely, but they'll probably loosen up on the security measures a bit. It's kind of ridiculous to think that he could live like this forever. Izuku reaches up and wipes the sweat off his forehead with the back of his wrist. He'll feel better about this situation once these stupid nightmares are over. Maybe then he'll finally feel safe. Maybe then he can stop being selfish and appreciate all that his heroes are doing to protect him. It's not like they mean to take his freedom from him. He could see the pity in their eyes last night. They feel bad that they have to do this. He needs to think about their point of view. This is hard on them too. He knows his friends seeing him upset probably made them feel bad. He can't let himself be miserable all the time, that'll only make them worry about him even more, and that'll make him feel even worse. So caught up in his thoughts, he accidentally stumbles, but he manages to catch himself before he can face-plant on the floor. Straightening up, he gasps for breath and continues jogging. His body bounces lightly as his feet pound against the tarmac, the rhythmic thumping and the pounding of his own heartbeat in his ears being the only sound he hears. Running has always felt good to him, the rush of endorphins, the burning of his muscles. It's a simple task he can do while he clears his head, organizing the jumble of thoughts and emotions into something he can try to understand. Actually, it's kind of making him feel just a little bit better. He's missed this. Missed the physical exertion of a long, exhausting run. It makes him think of the runs he would go on with Kaken back in middle school before when they were still taking self-defense classes with Kimura. Which reminds him, when is he going to start his own physical training again? Aizawa is busy preparing the others for their provisional license exam, but maybe he can ask him if they can train for an hour or two afterwards? Shinsu is no doubt way ahead of him at this point, and he'll probably be too tired from his regular training to do any extra training with Izuku. The Greenet wonders if he'll use his capture weapon in one of his ultimate moves. On that note, becoming more adept with his own capture weapon might help Izuku feel better. It might help him feel safer, to be stronger. That's a problem that he was having earlier, right? It's one thing to have confidence in others' ability to protect you, but it's another to have confidence in your ability to protect yourself. Maybe it'll help make the nightmares go away. He thinks of Shinsu's words. Listen, it's good that you wanna get strong, but you should do it for the right reasons. Do it for you. That's a good reason to get stronger, right? He is doing it for himself. He's doing it because he wants to feel better. Izuku runs until the sky is stained with pink and orange hues, then returns to the dorm building so he can start getting ready for school. He slows down when he reaches the steps and takes his hair out of his ponytail, idly running his hand through his sweaty curls as he pushes open the door. And what do you mean you haven't seen him? Where the fuck else could he? Kaken is standing in the middle of the common area, wild-eyed and panting as he snarls at Ojiro and Sato sitting at the table with their breakfast. At the sound of the door opening, he whips his head around to fix his fiery gaze on Izuku. His eyes widen for a brief moment before he storms over. You! He roars so loudly that Izuku flinches. Where the fuck were you? I went to your room and you weren't there. Izuku blinks, stunned, confused, and a little scared. I just went on a run. He replies hesitantly. He doesn't understand why Kaken's so pissed off. It's not exactly an odd thing for him to do. Kaken knows this too. He stops halfway before reaching him, face twitching a couple of times, before he snaps, well, fucking leave a note next time or something. Izuku frowns. A note? Kaken seems to realize the ridiculousness of his request and shakes his head, growling in frustration as he stammers, or text me or something, just fuck it, never mind, just never mind. His voice rises into a shout and he shoves his fists into his pockets, glaring at the ground furiously. Silence descends upon the common area. Everyone that's already up and eating breakfast watches the exchange with wary eyes. Izuku pauses. He can practically hear the way Kaken's teeth are grinding as he burns holes into the ground with his glare. But looking closer, he can see that the muscles on his arms are taut, and that he's panting, catching his breath, as if he had just been running. Running throughout the building looking for him because he was scared shitless that he'd been kidnapped again. Oh, crap. Guilt claws at his stomach. Kaken probably just went to check on him, maybe to make sure he actually woke up since he knows he's a slow starter in the mornings because they're best friends, and freaked out when he didn't see him there. Izuku is sure if he checks his phone now, which is still on mute from last night, he'll see a bunch of missed messages from the blonde. Izuku swallows. Slowly, he takes a step closer to Kaken, then another step, gradually closing the distance between them until he's standing right in front of him. Kaken doesn't look up, but he does incline his head slightly when Izuku gently places his hands on his forearms. Leaning close, Izuku murmurs, "I'm sorry." Kaken stays silent, but he lets out a soft sigh through his nose. A small amount of the tension melts out of his shoulders. Izuku gives his forearms a brief squeeze, then brushes past him and starts walking towards the elevator. He's not the only one trying to recover. Chapter 38. Training with Recovery Girl is a mix of going over information and procedures he already knows, trying to absorb new information as well as he can, and using his quirk whenever the opportunity arrives. Recovery Girl doesn't want to introduce too much new information to him because there's only so much he can memorize on such a short notice, but it only makes Izuku all the more nervous to think about all the stuff that he won't know on the exam, even though she assures him that he isn't even expected to know all the material. Unlike the day before, a good handful of students show up with injuries throughout the afternoon. Now that people have had some time to think of what they want to do for their ultimate moves, they're putting those ideas into action, which, of course, results in some less than pleasant outcomes for a few. However, the more injuries there are, the more practice Izuku gets with his quirk, and the better he'll do on his exam, so it works out for him. Vaguely, he recalls Kaminari making a comment about him being the only person to get excited about people getting hurt. Around the end of the day when his training is starting to wrap up, Izuku is surprised to see All Might's familiar mane of hair pop through the door. All Might. Izuku tilts his head. "What are you doing here?" He'd thought the man would be with Class 1A again today, but he's not even in his muscled form, or his hero costume. All Might steps into the room with a sheepish smile, rubbing the back of his neck. Aizawa-kun ratted me out to Chiyo-san about joining in on training yesterday, even though I didn't do anything physical, he mutters the last part under his breath. And I was stuck doing office work today. But Chiyo-san said to come by later so she could do some more healing. He glances at Recovery Girl, who gestures at one of the beds. "Go on and take a seat. I'll be with you in a moment, let me just put this away." She slides off her chair and starts gathering up the diagrams she and Izuku were going over before All Might came in. As the hero settles himself on the bed, he looks at Izuku and asks, "How are you doing, my boy? I'm sorry I haven't stopped by to check on you sooner, but I figured you've been very busy between moving in and training for your exam." "Oh, I'm alright," Izuku replies, not thinking twice about it. All Might hums in response, seemingly accepting his answer, but his gaze lingers on him. There's something in his eyes, not quite curious, but more analytical, as they roam over his face. Izuku suddenly feels rather self-conscious. All Might has probably spoken to Aizawa at some point today, and if the latter mentions something about what happened last night, then he's no doubt realized that Izuku isn't fine. The Greenet knows that his sleep deprivation is probably becoming a bit more evident in his appearance as well. It's a miracle that Recovery Girl hasn't brought it up yet. Before All Might can say anything though, Recovery Girl comes back over and starts checking his wounds. She has him take off his shirt, revealing his bandaged torso, then starts removing that. Izuku steps forward to help and All Might's eyes flicker to him. He coughs awkwardly, catching Recovery Girl's attention. She stops and glances over her shoulder at Izuku. "Oh, you don't need to help me with this, Midoriya-kun. Besides, you know you're not allowed to use your quirk on him yet." Izuku pauses, frowning slightly. "I know, I wasn't going to," he rasps, eyeing All Might's bandages. "Isn't this a good opportunity for me to learn, though? It's not often I get to deal with big injuries." The memory of All for One's fist driving into All Might's side flashes before his eyes and he flinches. "You'll have plenty of opportunities later," Recovery Girl says a tad bit too dismissively, "and it's not a big injury anymore. I think one more round of healing should do it. I just need to check on the progress." She says the last part to All Might. He nods, but she doesn't continue unraveling the bandages. Instead, both adults simultaneously glance back at Izuku. The freckled boy is confused, until he takes in their positioning, the way Recovery Girl is standing with her back to him, somewhat shielding All Might's torso from his view, while the number one hero is sitting with his shoulders hunched, almost like he's curled in on himself, trying to hide, and realization hits. They don't want him to see what All for One did to All Might. Izuku bites the inside of his lip. It's understandable, of course. They don't want to upset him, they don't want to trigger any unpleasant memories, especially since he's the one who healed All for One. Even if it wasn't willing, it was still his energy that made him strong enough to inflict those wounds on All Might. Izuku removes his teeth from his lip before he can make himself bleed. Yeah, maybe it's a good idea for him to not look. Turning, he wordlessly walks over to his desk and sits down, busying himself by opening one of the many textbooks he has stacked next to his computer and picking up where he left off. After a moment or two, he hears shuffling behind him as Recovery Girl goes through the motions of checking All Might's injuries. Eventually, there's the familiar sound of a very wet kiss. "All right, mister," Recovery Girl says, "you're back where you started." Izuku glances up in time to see All Might shrugging on his shirt, mangled scar disappearing behind the fabric. "Thank you, Chio-san." He bows his head politely. When he glances up, his eyes meet Izuku's. Not wanting him to leave on a negative note, Izuku tries to lighten the mood. "I promise I'm going to heal you as soon as I can, All Might," he says, beaming as he clenches his fists. "I just have to pass my license exam next week." He means to stay positive, but a jolt of nerves suddenly shoots through his chest as soon as the last words leave his mouth. There's a lot hanging in the balance if he fails. He won't be able to heal All Might or Ingenium, for that matter. Both heroes that he's promised to bring back to health will have to wait even longer, all because he can't pass a stupid test. All Might must catch the worry in his expression, because his face breaks into a smile, and the room seems to grow 10 times brighter. "And I have no doubt that you will," he says confidently with a decisive nod. Sliding off the bed, he steps over to Izuku and rests his hand atop his head. "Don't stress over this exam. You're the smartest and most determined young man I know. And you've been working towards this goal for your entire life." "I know." Izuku sighs, already reaching up to push All Might's hand off. The hero manages to ruffle his curls before making his way towards the door. "Chin up, young Midoriya," he says brightly, "you'll be a healer before you know it." Izuku gazes after him as he disappears. There's only a short amount of time left before training ends, so he and Recovery Girl return to studying. But something about All Might's words linger in Izuku's mind. He's going to be able to heal All Might soon. Really soon, actually. Maybe even next week, if he gets his provisional license. The goal that he's been reaching for so long is suddenly really close. He's going to have a provisional license. He's going to be one step closer to becoming an actual healer. He'll really be a healer before he knows it. The thought should fill him with excitement, but for some reason it's dampened, dulled. Like he knows he should be, but something's holding him back. A thought lingers in the back of his head, as if it had been pushed away and forgotten, and now it bubbles to the surface. Did you ever want to do anything else other than be a healer? Crap. Did you ever even think to consider anything else, or did you just follow what society expected out of you? Not this again. To live your life serving heroes? To exhaust yourself to make them stronger? No, no, stop it. Come on, why now? Gritting his teeth, he tries to shake the thought away, but Shigaraki's persistent voice rings in his head like an earworm. To make matters worse, his own traitorous thoughts start echoing back at him. Of course he's not that excited about this. Yeah, it's great that he's finally reaching the future that he's been aiming for, but did he really expect anything else? It's not like there was ever a chance of him failing with a quirk like his. It's not like he ever took a risk, it's not like he ever took an interest in anything other than what people told him to be interested in. It's not like he ever made a choice for himself, but he did. He chose to become a healer. He wants to become a healer. Right? Izuku clenches his jaw. It's not like he didn't have any other options as a kid. Of course there were, it's just that healing made the most sense, especially with his quirk. It's not bad to choose a career based off of your quirk. It's just, it was logical. But that's not the point Shigaraki was trying to make, was it? It was more about the influence other people were having on him. Right? That there were certain expectations. That they were trying to make decisions for him. And, well, Izuku supposes he can see that. He thinks back to the day his quirk manifested, how his doctor suggested to his mother that he become a healer, and then his mother wanted him to become one for his safety, and then after that it seemed like everyone Kaken, his friends, his teachers was encouraging him to become a healer. And, aside from occasionally longing to be a hero, he never really considered anything else. It seemed like such a natural conclusion to come to. He has a healing quirk, so he will become a healer. But is that what he truly wants? He loves healing people, but is that because he really loves doing it, or because he spent literally almost his entire life being told that he should love healing people? How is he supposed to know? Orion-kun? Midoriya-kun? Recovery Girl's voice cuts through his thoughts. Are you paying attention? Izuku startles, guilt flooding his chest. Oh, sorry. He hesitates. His head is a mess of jumbled up thoughts and emotional mayhem. The run he went on this morning helped him ease off some of the pressure from the aftermath from last night, but this new realization is kind of throwing him off all over again. The emotions are swirling beneath the surface, begging to be unleashed like floodwaters bursting past a long-standing dam. And he doesn't really like to voice his inner turmoil, mostly because he feels bad about dumping that onto other people, and he usually ends up crying anyway. But he glances at Recovery Girl. She has a powerful healing quirk too. If anyone else is to understand, it would be her. His mentor is still looking at him, still waiting for him to continue. Taking a deep breath, he asks, Recovery Girl. Hearing the nervousness in his voice, Recovery Girl frowns in concern and turns slightly in her chair. Yes. Unsure of how to ask, Izuku wrings his hands and stammers, did you ever, wanna do something else? His mentor blinks. Pardon me? Like aside from becoming a healer, Izuku explains hastily, did you ever, want to become something else? Oh. His mentor relaxes, then processes his question. No, not really. Oh. Izuku's shoulders sag. Of course not. She's a born healer, through and through. She's perfect. She probably never had a doubt in her mind what she was meant to do. Why can't it be that easy for him? His expression must look troubled, because Recovery Girl's brows furrow and she says, don't tell me you're getting second thoughts now. No, of course not. Izuku waves his hands frantically. I was just curious. He trails off into silence. After a moment, Recovery Girl tilts her head. Did you ever want to do something else? She asks. Izuku considers just brushing it off for the sake of ease. He did technically already get his answer, but he finds himself hesitantly rasping, well, I did want to become a hero. You are a hero, Recovery Girl says immediately. Healers are considered heroes. I hope I don't need to remind you of that again. No, it's okay. Izuku gives her a weak smile. A long, heavy silence presses down on them. Then, Recovery Girl sighs and turns to face him fully. Alright, what's this about, Midoriya-kun? She asks in a no-nonsense tone. Izuku looks down at his lap, twisting his hands and his shirt. She's done so much for him to get him where he is now. The last thing he wants her to think is that he's ungrateful for all that she's done for him. But he just can't stand the thought of committing his whole life to doing something that he isn't even sure he wants. He wants this to be his choice. He thought this was his choice, he thought he loved this, but now. He sighs, squeezing his eyes shut. I want to be a healer, he rasps quietly. I like being able to help people with my quirk, it makes me feel good, you know? When my quirk manifested, I was so happy that I would be able to help people. I was so happy that I was going to become a healer. But when I was with the League of Villains. Recovery Girl tenses, and her eyes widen slightly. Shigaraki started saying stuff about how I never really had a choice in anything, how I basically had to become a healer with a quirk like mine and that society would never let me do anything different. And I thought it was all bullshit at first, of course, but then I kind of realized I never really did consider anything else. I mean, once my quirk manifested, I only ever focused on becoming a healer. My mom and everyone was so excited for me and I never thought of doing anything else. It just never even crossed my mind. And is that bad? The question slips out without him meaning to, but he doesn't give time for Recovery Girl to answer. He's rambling now, almost as if he's just talking to himself. I feel like every other kid had so much more freedom to explore their interests and I just missed out on that. It was like because I had a healing quirk everything was just decided for me. Like as soon as my quirk manifested, bam, I'm a healer. And that, damn it, that other people telling me what to do, making decisions for me, it's not just something I'm dealing with now, it's something I've been dealing with my entire life, and I've just never realized it before. His voice starts to rise to a hoarse shout and he struggles to reel himself in, trying not to lose focus. But even if I did try to explore other interests, that's the thing, like, I don't think I could. Shigaraki, he said things and they kind of made sense, I guess. I mean, he lets out a frustrated noise, startling Recovery Girl. Gah. I like healing people. I love healing people. But I mean, maybe that's not all I would like. How would I know? What if I restricted myself or something? I just never thought to try anything else, and even if I did, it would be so selfish of me to waste my quirk on some irrelevant hobby. Midoriya-kun. Midoriya-kun, Recovery Girl interrupts his rant. Stop. Calm down, she orders firmly. Izuku snaps his mouth shut, shame and guilt curdling deep in his stomach. His mentor gazes at him for a long, tense moment, then shakes her head. Alright, first of all, forget whatever crap that villain put in your head, okay? Forget it. She pauses, and it takes Izuku a moment to realize that she's waiting for a response. He nods slowly, and she continues. Second, and answer me honestly. Do you want to be a healer? Izuku gulps. Recovery Girl holds his gaze steady, but there's no anger in her eyes, no judgment. All he sees is the same dark, intelligent eyes that he sees every time he looks at his mentor. He lets out a shaky breath. Does he want to be a healer? Despite his turmoil, the answer comes easily. Yes, he croaks. Yes, I love being a healer. His eyes start to sting and he blinks rapidly, shaking his head. That's the thing, I'm so so confused. I just don't know if that's I mean, if I really know, I think I get it. Recovery Girl says, he was trying to get you to think that you only want to be a healer because that's what society expects from you due to your healing quirk. Her expression darkens and she growls, manipulative bastard. Normally, Izuku might have snorted in surprise at the colorful language from his mentor, but all he does now is sniffle and ask, was he right, though? He reaches up and brushes his long curls out of his face, sighing, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine myself doing anything else with this quirk. I can't imagine anyone letting me do anything else with this quirk. I mean, if I were a, lawyer or something and I had this healing quirk, people would get so mad. They'd think I'd be letting it go to waste or something. So it's like, did I really even have a choice? His voice breaks. Recovery Girl leans back, in her chair, a contemplative look on her face. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't quirk discrimination in this society, she says after a pause, and I don't really know what would happen if you decided to do something different with your life. Every person with strong healing quirks that I know of always become healers. I guess I always thought of it more as a natural inclination. Like, how people with intelligence quirks might choose to work as detectives, or scientists, or engineers. It makes sense to want to do what we're naturally good at. Izuku nods, and Recovery Girl tilts her head in consideration. But, I guess there's also another side to it. When you have a certain type of quirk, people will assume what you'll be because of it. And like you said, those expectations can seem very restrictive, especially to people like us, whose quirks are rare and valued by the hero society. She sighs through her nose. It's a difficult situation, and I'm sorry that you were made to feel as if you didn't have a choice, but do you remember what Toshinori-kun said all those months ago when I first met you in the hospital? Izuku is taken aback by the sudden change of subject. But his mentor continues, he said that you would be a great healer even if you were quirkless. I believe that too. Recovery Girl leans forward and takes his hand, gazing into his eyes firmly. It doesn't matter what your quirk is, Midoriya-kun, I believe that you're meant to be a healer. The drive that you have for it, the thing that motivates you to keep rushing ahead and learning everything that you can in order to better help people. The thing that keeps you thinking straight even when you're scared because you know you have to keep moving, that is you, Midoriya Izuku. That's not what anyone else told you to be, that is you. And that's why I know you will be a great healer, because if anyone is meant to be a healer, it's you. Izuku stares at her. The world turns blurry. Recovery Girl lets out a little oaf as he throws his arms around her and promptly bursts into tears. Oh. Her muffled voice is a little surprised, but then her arms wrap around him as best as they can and she pats his back soothingly. Oh, dear. It's alright. It's rather unwarranted, how uncontrolled and messy his crying is. He sobs and probably squeezes the life out of his poor mentor. It also lasts for a while, but to be fair, he is pretty sleep deprived, and after all the stress his mind has been through, it doesn't take much for it to snap again before it's even fully recovered. He feels so stupid and ashamed for ever letting Shigaraki's words sway him. It's as if all the anxiety and pressure that's been steadily building up inside of him ever since Kamino, just comes gushing out. He clings to Recovery Girl like a lifeline, strangled sobs and wails tearing their way out of his abused throat as he cries hysterically. It takes a few minutes to come back down to himself, but when he does, he's embarrassed to see the wet patch he's left on his mentor's shoulder. Oh, he hiccups, pulling away and hastily wiping his eyes with the back of his wrist. I'm sorry. Midoriya-kun. Recovery Girl gazes at him with sorrowful eyes. I'm sorry, Izuku croaks for a third time, trying to dry his cheeks even though the tears haven't quite stopped spilling. Still, he insists, I'm fine. Recovery Girl looks at him steadfastly and says, no. You're not. Izuku's breath hitches. I am. His voice wobbles pathetically. His mentor holds his gaze and shakes her head. You're not. More tears slip out of his eyes and he squeezes them shut, clenching his fists. Frustration bubbles in his chest and he blurts out, I'm so tired, recovery girl. He crumples and tells her everything, tells her about his nightmares preventing him from sleeping, his lingering exhaustion from his quirk, his feelings of being trapped due to the new security measures, and then the subsequent feelings of guilt because the heroes are only doing their jobs. He even rants a little bit about Todoroki, although she's probably confused about that, and he stops as soon as his mind catches up to his mouth. It feels good to vent, though. It feels liberating, like a giant weight has been lifted off of his chest. When he's done, recovery girl reaches up to gently wipe his tears away with a tissue, and then gives him a warm hug that he melts into. Midoriya-kun, she says calmly, pulling away, I'm going to tell you what you need to do. Please, he practically begs, the single word coming out in a gush of air. I'm going to give you some sleeping pills to hopefully help you sleep through the night, she starts. He nods, and then she adds, and I'm going to set you up to meet with a therapist. His mind blanks. Huh? Frankly, I should have done it sooner, she says, that was a mistake on my part. It was foolish of me to assume that you would be okay after such a traumatic event. Izuku hesitates, curling in on himself slightly. A therapist? I don't know. The thought of opening up to a complete stranger about what happened to him with the League of Villains. A small hand slides over his. He looks up at recovered girl's wrinkled face. You need to talk about this, she says seriously. It's not healthy to keep all of those thoughts and emotions bottled up inside of you. A therapist will help you learn to cope with what happened, and hopefully that will make the nightmares go away as well. Izuku reluctantly considers this. He does want the nightmares to go away, and it's not like anything he's doing right now is working. There's still one problem. I can't leave campus too often though, he rasps. We can have them come here, she replies simply, and, well, there's no arguing with that. So he hesitantly agrees. Recovery girl smiles. Good. She pauses, and then frowns briefly. I wish you would have told me about the effects of your quirk exhaustion sooner. Are you sure you're going to be alright doing the exam? Yes. Izuku says immediately. Recovery girl gives him a chastising look. A test can always be done another time, Midoriya-kun, but your health I know. Izuku gives her hands a squeeze. But seriously, it's basically gone now. The only exhaustion I have now is just from not being able to sleep. He lets out a tired huff, and reaches up to rub his brow. His mentor's eyes shine with pity. Well. With a sigh, she gets up and waddles over to a cabinet, rummaging around for a few seconds before fishing out a bottle. She hands it to him and tells him how many to take. Thank you. He glances at the clock, which reads 4:25 p.m., and startles. Training usually ends at 4 p.m. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I've been keeping you. Recovery girl waves him off. Don't you worry about it. Now, please, for the love of God, go get some rest. He smiles and grabs his stuff, heading towards the door. As he slips out, his mentor says, by the way, returning momentarily to the topic of having interests aside from healing, no one ever said you can't be a healer and do something else too. Izuku glances over his shoulder. Huh? Recovery girl smiles. It's called having a part-time job. And closes the door. Izuku blinks. For a long moment, he stares blankly at the closed door. After a few seconds, he lets out a heavy sigh and leans against the wall, dropping his head in his hands and rubbing his temple with his fingers. His mind still feels like it's trying to catch up with everything that's going on. But even though he cried and had an emotional talk, he doesn't feel that bad. It wasn't as stressful as he thought it would be. He actually feels kind of okay now. Better than he has in a long while. Once he started saying things out loud, it's like it made it easier to understand the thoughts going on in his head. And Recovery Girl didn't get mad at him for being unsure about wanting to become a healer, even though she's spent literal months preparing him to be one. He's so incredibly grateful to have her as his mentor. Only she could single-handedly restore his faith in himself with just a few words. As for therapy, he's still a little uncomfortable about the idea. Aside from typing out information during the debriefing, he hasn't really opened up to anyone about what he went through while he was with the League of Villains. If he can't bring himself to talk to his closest friends about it, how can he possibly expect himself to be able to talk to a complete stranger about it? But if Recovery Girl thinks it will help, then he's willing to at least try. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Talking now made him feel better, didn't it? Ever since Kamino, he's just been so wrapped up in his head. It's like he can't escape from his own thoughts. But maybe therapy is what he needs? People do it all the time when bad things happen to them. He's a healer, he should know that. Therapy, it's like a subset of healing. For mental health, which is just as important as physical health. If he thinks of it that way, maybe he could also take this as a sort of learning experience? Yeah, that's nice. That makes him feel a bit better about it. He inhales deeply and lifts his head from his hands, rolling his shoulders. Alright. Okay. He's okay now. And he's not just telling himself that he actually feels, for the first time in a long time. Okay. His mind is still a little fragile, still a little frayed at the edges, but clear, not a chaotic storm of emotions and confused thoughts. He has problems, but at least now he knows that there are things he can do to solve those problems. So he lifts his foot, and he takes a step forward. As he starts walking down the hallway, he thinks back to what Recovery Girl last said. A part-time job? It seems like such an obvious solution to his dilemma. He was so worried about society not letting him have a job unrelated to healing due to the wasting of his rare quirk, but, well, she's right. No one said he couldn't be a healer and do something else. He feels kind of stupid now. The answer was right there all along. Plenty of people have part-time jobs. But what would he do? Izuku frowns at the ground. Midoriya-kun? The freckled boy startles out of his thoughts and looks up to see Aizawa standing at the end of the hallway. Sensei. He smiles in greeting, but something tickles at the back of his mind. Didn't he mean to ask him something? Aizawa tilts his head as the boy approaches. Your training ran long today, he comments. Oh, yeah, Izuku gives a little nervous laugh. He already laid his heart out to Recovery Girl today. He doesn't think he could handle doing it again to Aizawa, no matter how much he respects the man. However, the word training does remind him of what he wanted to ask. By the way, when can we start our training sessions again? He asks, coming to stop in front of the teacher. Aizawa peers down at his face. Are you okay? Izuku blinks and realizes that his eyes are probably still red and puffy from crying. Oh. Yeah, I'm fine. He reaches up to rub his eyes, then thinks better of it, and lowers his hand. Aizawa arches a skeptical brow, somehow pulling off an expression of both unimpressed and concerned. I'm fine, seriously, Izuku insists. Recovery Girl just said something nice and I cried. It's not a lie, and Aizawa seems to accept that answer more easily. Alright, that's a bit more believable. He shrugs and Izuku wrinkles his nose childishly. As for resuming your training sessions. He looks down at Izuku through hooded eyes, analyzing him. I'm not too keen on the idea, he says at last. Izuku's shoulders droop. Why not? He tries not to sound like he's whining, but it's a near thing. Well, for one thing, Shinsu-kun wouldn't be able to train with you since he would be too tired from his regular training. Now that he's joined 1A and is preparing his special move, Aizawa points out. Can't you just train me one-on-one? Izuku asks. I could, Aizawa says, but I won't. Because you haven't recovered from what happened to you yet. Izuku pauses. The words I'm fine dance on the tip of his tongue, but at the last second he stops them from falling off his lips. They won't solve anything. At his silence, Aizawa continues. Don't think I haven't noticed how exhausted you are. You can't sleep, can you? His voice drops, softening slightly. You don't have to rush back into normal, alright, kid? Give yourself some time. I'll train you when you're good and ready. Izuku swallows and sighs, nodding. Alright. Aizawa nods too and jerks his head down the hallway. Shall we? He begins leading the way back to the dorms and Izuku follows after him. He looks down at his feet, trying not to be too disheartened. Well, he supposes it would be hard to spar while he's so tired anyways. Why did he even think it was a good idea in the first place? Right, he thought it might help him get rid of his nightmares if he felt stronger. But now he has therapy for that. So that's that. He shakes his head. Well, anyway, back to the part-time job thing. What would he even do if he were to get a part-time job? Which he should, right? That will make him feel less restricted to just healing, if he has another job of an unrelated hobby, something that's free of societal influences, something that anybody would like, no matter their quirk. It should probably be something else he's good at. Or something he likes to do. But then that's his problem. What else does he like? It's always been about healing, heroes, or sparring, but even that was only for self-defense purposes. He hardly knows his own interests because he never really explored anything other than healing. Then there's also the issue of his busy schedule. Would he even be able to keep up with a part-time job? He's only an apprentice and he already has a lot of work that will only increase when he's a real healer. How will he manage 2 jobs? Izuku sighs. He wishes he could ask someone about this. He wishes he knew someone with a part-time job. Why'd you sigh? Aizawa grunts, glancing back at him. Izuku looks up. His eyes widen. You have a part-time job. He blurts out too loudly, his weak voice cracking in multiple places. Aizawa stops and blinks in confusion. Yes, embarrassed by his outburst, Izuku feels his cheeks flush and he immediately averts his gaze. He's about to brush it off, tell Aizawa that it's nothing, but... Well, Aizawa does have a part-time job. Should he even consider him being a hero as a part-time job? He wonders how the man balances heroics with teaching. Obviously he teaches by day, so does he go out on patrol at night? How will he do that with a new dorm situation? Aizawa is still staring, not looking particularly annoyed, so Izuku gives himself a mental shake and asks, I mean, how does that work out? He winces at how awkward it sounds. Thankfully, Aizawa either doesn't notice, or doesn't care, and replies coolly, well, before I would teach during the day and patrol at night, but now I've had to cut down on my patrolling hours and change it to mostly weekend shifts, or patrol near during some weeknights. Izuku nods, wide-eyed, as Aizawa then shrugs. It's not too much of a problem for me since I'm not part of a big agency. Why? He looks down at Izuku when he asks this and the Gurinet startles. Just curious. He says, Recovery Girl and I were talking about some stuff and she mentioned me getting a part-time job. Aizawa narrows his eyes. I just told you you can't leave campus, why are you talking about getting a part-time job? Izuku huffs, well, not right now. Just, like, later. In the future, I mean. Aizawa sniffs, seemingly satisfied, and asks, what are you thinking of doing, then? He turns and continues walking, jerking his head for Izuku to follow. The freckled boy trots up to his side. I don't know, he sighs, that's kind of my problem. I've recently realized that I've been so focused on becoming a healer that I never thought to take interest in anything else. He pauses, then admits sheepishly, I don't have many hobbies. Oh. Aizawa glances at him, then looks away. After a moment, he grunts, well, if it makes you feel any better, neither do I. Izuku smiles and lets out a little huff of laughter. They walk in silence for a few seconds, and Izuku thinks that maybe that's the end of it, That Aizawa doesn't really have anything else to add, but then the man heaves a sigh and looks up at the sky. "So, you're trying to figure out what you like?" he asks, "so you can. What, make a career out of it? Another one, on top of the one you're already trying to make?" "Yeah, basically," Izuku replies. There's no judgment in Aizawa's monotonous voice, but with his word choice, he feels the slight need to defend himself anyways. It can't be that uncommon for people to have more than one job. "It's not," Aizawa says, "all the teachers at have 2 jobs. Izuku blinks. "Oh. Yeah, that's right." Once again, he feels rather stupid for realizing something so obvious so late. Present Mick has 3, actually, Aizawa adds, his lip quirking up, "if you consider his shitty radio show to be a job." Izuku frowns and gives him a disapproving glare. "Sensei, that's mean," he says in a chastising tone. Aizawa's smirk disappears and he averts his eyes, clearing his throat. Now that he's mentioned Present Mick though, that gets Izuku thinking, but that's not a heroic hobby, he rasps. "That's just something he likes to do, right?" Aizawa nods, leading him around the corner. "Well, yeah. It doesn't have to do anything with heroics, you know. He can just do it because he likes it. That's why it's called a hobby." He gives him a pointed look. Izuku hums. Which brings him back to finding his own hobbies. Finding his own interests. Finding what he likes to do. Where does he even begin? Most people figure this out when they're kids. Glancing up at Aizawa, Izuku smiles brightly and asks, "What do you like to do, Aizawa-sensei?" Aizawa huffs, and after a long moment of deliberation, replies in a short, blunt tone, "Sleep." Izuku snorts. The man smirks and nudges him with his elbow. "Take a page out of my book, kid. You look like you could use some shut-eye." "I'm working on it." Izuku shakes his head. "What else do you like to do?" "I already told you I don't have many hobbies," Aizawa grumbles. "Besides, aren't you trying to figure out what your interests are?" "Well, yeah, but..." Izuku struggles to think of what to say. "I mean, there are so many things I could do, more things than I could ever fit into my lifetime. Doesn't it make sense to try things that I know will be good? Because people that I know and trust like to do those things." Aizawa blinks, long and slow. "You mean you're going to ask your friends what they like and just pick and choose from that?" Izuku smiles and nods. "Exactly." Aizawa shrugs. "I guess that's one way of doing it." Excitement bubbles in his chest. Izuku's smile stretches into a grin and they approach Heights Alliance a couple of minutes later. When they reach the top of the stairs, Aizawa stops him with a hand on his head. "You're young," he grunts, "you'll find something you like. So don't worry about it too much." He gives his curls a shake before nudging him forward. Izuku flashes him a grateful smile and steps through the door. After greeting his classmates, he immediately races up to the 3rd floor, kidnaps Kaken, and drags him into his room. The bewildered blonde stares at him as he excitedly rambles on and on about his revelation while digging through his bag and fishing out his notebook. He should start making a list, shouldn't he? Whatever his new hobby is going to be, it will eventually turn into a part-time job, right? So, obviously, it should be something that won't interfere with his healing career. It can't be physically strenuous then. That gets rid of his already sort of hobbies of running and sparring. He scribbles down in his notebook, and then frowns. Does he have any other sort of hobbies? He does like to play video games occasionally, but he knows he doesn't like it enough to want to become a professional gamer. What does that leave him with? What are his interests? There's such a big world of possibilities to explore. It's so exciting. Where does he even begin? He should start going around asking his friends what their favorite hobbies are and then maybe make some sort of list. Kaken interrupts his muttering by yanking the notebook out of his hands. "Kaken!" he protests, trying to grab it back, but Kaken tosses it behind him so it lands on the bed. He makes to move past him, but the blonde grabs him and pushes him back. Hey, what are you, Jesus Christ, Izuku, shut the fuck up. Kaken snaps, scowling at him. Izuku startles and snaps his mouth shut. After a moment of glaring at him, Kaken lets out a sharp huff and runs a hand through his spiky hair. Look, he growls, I'm glad that you're having a philosophical moment or whatever, and that you've decided to explore yourself and all this crap, but you're doing the same shit you always do, and that's rushing into things. Like, calm down, for fuck's sake. You don't need to figure this crap out this week. Quit making lists and shit and just he lets out a frustrated snarl. Just fucking relax and have fun, Jesus Christ, you little shit. Not everything has to be this complicated. He pants a little after his rant, glaring heatedly at Izuku. The greenet blinks, stunned. Then, he considers Kaken's words. He's quiet for a long time. So, just let it come to me? He asks. Kaken makes a noise and throws his hands up in the air. Sure. Izuku doesn't really like that idea. He wants to find his new hobby now. It's exciting. Everyone else grew up with all these cool interests. Everyone else has their thing. Why does he have to wait even longer for his? But Recovery Girl has mentioned on many occasions that he does have the tendency to rush ahead, as Kaken just said. He's impatient just like he was with his recovery. He was trying to push forward and move ahead before he was ready, insisting that he was fine when he's not, and that could have hurt him. So, for once in his life, maybe he should just have patience. Izuku lets out a long, heavy sigh. All right. Kaken rolls his eyes. Thank you for your sacrifice, he drawls, then jerks his head over his shoulder. Now let's go downstairs. Thanks to your smart-ass mouth last night, fucking ponytails put me on the first rotation to cook. Sorry. Izuku winces, then says, I'm surprised you're even doing it, though. You were pretty adamant about not wanting to teach anybody last night. TCH. Kaken scoffs and turns towards the door, but the silence is suspicious. A shit-eating grin creeps on Izuku's face. Oh my god, she made Kirishima-kun your partner, didn't she? Shut the fuck up. Oh my god, she did? Shut the fuck up. Chapter 39. Life starts to fall into a rocky sort of rhythm after that. The sleeping pills don't end up helping very much. He does fall asleep a lot faster, and maybe sleeps just a bit longer than before, but inevitably a nightmare makes him jerk awake in the early hours of the morning. He starts to make it a habit to go for a jog around the dorms when this happens, after texting Kaken to make sure he knows, of course. And, to his delight, Ida starts joining him too. Apparently, he had enjoyed going on early morning runs before school, and offers his company to Izuku, which the latter accepts. Part of him wonders if it's just because he doesn't want him out jogging by himself, but mostly he's just glad to have a running partner again. And one that can actually keep up with him, unlike Kaken. Breakfast is usually a pretty easy affair, since most people just choose to eat something easy and quick rather than do any actual cooking. Then, Izuku splits off from his classmates and spends the rest of his morning and afternoon training with Recovery Girl. He misses not being in class with his friends, but they're more than happy to tell him about their progress with their ultimate moves during dinner. Which, so far, hasn't actually been that bad. Yaozu's buddy system is appearing to be a success. Despite this, it's clear that everyone is still trying to get used to living with each other. There's still a bit of an awkward air sometimes, especially with some of the less sociable students, when they don't quite know what to do with themselves. In the silence of the night, some will curl up under their covers with feelings of homesickness pulling at their heartstrings. It's something that will disappear with time as they settle into their new lives. But then there are other things. The first incident occurs in the early morning after one of Izuku's runs. He's perched on the edge of the couch, sipping his water and just taking a bit of a breather before he goes up to take a shower. As he idly scrolls through his phone, he hears the front door open, and glances up to see Aizawa walk in. The man looks like he just rolled out of bed, which isn't much different from how he usually looks, and there's a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. Aizawa blinks drowsily at him and Izuku smiles briefly before looking back at his phone. He hears a tired huff, and then Aizawa's footsteps trudge across the common room. All of the sudden, his healer senses tingle. Aizawa trips over a pair of Crocs and Izuku leaps to his feet just in time to dive forward and catch him before he face plants into the floor. For a few long seconds of tense silence, the two simply cling to one another. Then, their heads simultaneously turn to look down at the offensively bright shoes. The cup of coffee is now spilled across the floor. Someone is getting detention. Aizawa growls, cold and furious. Izuku never pegged Kirishima as the type to leave his shoes in unsuspecting places, or as the type to wear Crocs. The thing is, with so many teenagers living under the same roof, all of their bad habits are noticed almost immediately. Somebody keeps leaving the kitchen cabinets open. That's not really a problem for Izuku. He doesn't spend much time in the kitchen, thanks to Kaken practically banning him from there, and he wouldn't even have noticed this problem if it weren't for the blonde. Sometimes Kaken will just disappear into the kitchen to grab or cook something, and then Izuku will hear a loud bang followed by a stream of colorful curses from his friend. No one has yet owned up to this particular bad habit because Kaken has, on multiple occasions, threatened to murder whoever is responsible. Tokoyami keeps leaving crumpled up paper towels and used napkins around. Not even in the kitchen, just everywhere. And to make matters worse, since he crumples them up into balls, Sushi likes to tear them up into little pieces and makes an even bigger mess. It's such an oddly random bad habit, one that Izuku wouldn't have expected from the feathered boy, but Ida's bad habit comes as even more of a surprise. Izuku is not expecting it at all. They're just coming back from one of their morning jogs, having worked up a nice sweat, and Izuku watches as Ida walks into the kitchen, reaches into the fridge, pulls out the orange juice, and drinks it straight from the carton. He's so stunned that he just stands there with his eyes growing wider and wider as Ida chugs literally the entire thing in front of him, then tosses the empty carton in the recycling bin. He doesn't even know where to begin with this. Drinking straight from the carton is such a surprisingly gross thing for Ida to do, but then finishing the whole carton in one go? Did he even take a breath? Why did he? Well, he must have been really thirsty, but it's a little rude to leave no orange juice for anyone else. Ida startles when he sees that his jaw is practically on the floor and immediately stammers out an apology. And then Izuku learns that Ida's quirk is actually fueled by orange juice, which, while strange, still doesn't give reason for the fact that he drank straight from the carton, and from the light flush on Ida's cheeks, he knows this, too. But at least he's aware of his own bad habit, and he does apologize for drinking all of the orange juice, promising to replace it and buy his own from then on, so nobody really gives him too much of a hard time. In contrast to his blue-haired friend, Izuku is entirely unaware of his own bad habits prior to living in the dorms. Somehow, it didn't even occur to him that he would have any foolish assumption. He's a young teenager, just like the rest of his classmates. Of course he has bad habits, he should know that. Still, that doesn't stop it from coming as a surprise when Todoroki of all people makes him aware of what one of his bad habits is. Like before, he's just come back from one of his morning runs with Ida. A few of their classmates are already up and getting breakfast, including Todoroki. Even though his runs really work up his appetite, Izuku usually showers before he eats. He hates sitting in his own sweat and he can already feel his tank top sticking to his warm muscles. As he starts making his way over to the elevator, he lifts the bottom of his tank top, stretching it up to reveal his slick abs, and wipes the sweat off his forehead. Thump ha! Izuku startles at Kaken's bark of laughter to see Todoroki stumbling back from the wall separating the kitchen and the lounge, his bangs ruffled. He rights himself a split second later as if nothing happened, blatantly ignoring the barely stifled snickering coming from Kirishima and Kaken from the dining table. Instead, He turns and stares at Izuku with wide eyes, face pale, looking as if he's just seen a ghost. Confused, Izuku hesitantly asks, "Todoroki-kun? Are you okay?" Todoroki's throat bobs as he swallows thickly. He makes a noise in response, then stiffly gestures with his hand. Your shirt. You used it, Izuku looks down and sees a damp stain on the bottom of his tank top where he used it to wipe his sweat off his forehead. "Oh!" he exclaims, then blushes. "Oh. It's just something he does all the time, and it never seems to bother Kaken when he goes running with him, but he didn't realize that to anyone not super familiar with him, that's probably really gross." Flushing in embarrassment, Izuku stammers out an apology and quickly excuses himself to go take a shower. He does his best not to wipe his sweat off on his shirt from then on, but, now that he's aware of this particular bad habit, he realizes that he does it a lot more often than he thought he did. It takes a conscious effort to stop himself midway from reaching up to wipe at his forehead or neck with his hand already wrapped in his shirt. Bad habits, turns out, are hard to break. Izuku isn't the only one of his classmates struggling to break them, but at least he's trying. Because apparently some of them aren't even willing to break their habits. Izuku learns this one night when a nightmare wakes him up much earlier than normal and he decides to go downstairs to get a drink before he gives sleeping another shot. Everything is quiet as he pads into the kitchen and starts going through the motions of making a cup of tea. It's an easy, relaxing process, and it helps take his mind off of the stress of his nightmare. With a warm cup of chamomile in his hands, he sighs in content and turns around. Shinsu silently looms 2 feet away from him. "Sup?" Izuku nearly leaps out of his skin. "Shinsu-kun!" he shrieks, hoarse voice cutting through the thick silence of the night. Catching himself, he quickly glances around before lowering his voice and hissing, "What the hell are you doing here?" Shinsu looks down at him through hooded eyes, seeming entirely unperturbed by his hostile tone, and drawls in a low timbre, "Same as you. Mind pouring me some?" He holds out his own cup. Izuku blinks, taken aback. "Oh, sure." He turns and pours the rest of the boiling water from the kettle. Shinsu thanks him quietly and spends the next couple of minutes making his own tea. Izuku drifts off to the side, not quite knowing if he should start up a conversation or just let the peaceful silence of the night continue. Thankfully, Shinsu makes that decision for him once he's done making his cup of tea, turning around and leaning back against the counter to face him while he brings his drink up to his lips. "So," he says, taking a sip, "what brings you here, tonight? You're not one of the usual night lurkers I see." Izuku tilts his head. "Night lurkers?" Shinsu waves his hand lazily. "Most of the time it's either Tokoyami-kun or Aizawa-sensei when he comes to check in on us during the night." Izuku frowns and he opens his mouth, but Shinsu adds, "Sometimes Tsuchan drops by too, but I'm pretty sure that's just because she has trouble sleeping, without her siblings around." "Who else? Are you here every night?" he asks incredulously. "Oh." Shinsu blinks slowly. "I don't sleep too well." Izuku's frown deepens. He's had a sneaking suspicion that both Aizawa and Shinsu don't get enough sleep. They both have near constant bags under their eyes and have similar low energy levels. And while Shinsu doesn't fall asleep during class like Aizawa does, he always seems to have a noticeable air of tiredness surrounding him. "Why haven't you ever told me or recovery girl about it? We could have given you sleep aids or—" Shinsu is already waving him off though. "Nah, those never work, and they make me feel even more tired the next day. Besides, I'm doing fine." Izuku narrows his eyes. "How much sleep do you get each night?" The corner of Shinsu's lip pulls up into a smirk. "Probably less than you," he admits, then takes a sip of tea, "but still somehow I look better." He quirks a brow pointedly and Izuku wrinkles his nose, trying not to feel too self-conscious about his own ragged appearance. Instead, he rasps, "You have insomnia." Shinsu yawns, "Probably." Izuku gazes at him for a moment. and then says slowly, "You should see a doctor, then." The taller boy shrugs. "Nah." Bewildered, Izuku asks, "Why not?" "Been dealing with it for a while," Shinsu replies nonchalantly. "I've tried a bunch of things and nothing's ever worked, so I've kinda just figured I guess I'll just live with it." Izuku stares as he shrugs again. "It's not so bad, I've gotten used to it over the years." Years. If Izuku feels this miserable being sleep-deprived for a little over a week, he can't even begin to imagine how Shinsu feels being sleep-deprived for years. "Shinsu-kun," Izuku says lightly. "Go to bed," he orders. Shinsu pauses, then smirks and shakes his head. "Nah, I'm good." "That wasn't a suggestion, Shinsu-kun," Izuku says. Shinsu blinks. Izuku smiles sweetly and says in a sugary tone, "I think you forget that I have medical authority over you, heroes in training." Shinsu's smirk disappears. "That means that I can, in fact, order you to bed." Shinsu stares at him for a few seconds, then straightens up to his full height, utilizing the good few inches between them as he regains his cool smirk and looks down at him. "And what are you gonna do if I say no?" he challenges, arching a brow. Izuku doesn't back down and clasps his hands. "Well, we could take this to Aizawa-sensei," he suggests casually. "I'm sure he'd love to be woken up at 2 a.m. just so he can force one of his students to go back to bed." His innocent smile takes a wicked edge. Shinsu snorts, "Bold of you to assume that he'd even be asleep right now." Izuku pauses. "So he's got insomnia too?" Shinsu tilts his head consideringly. "Not so much insomnia, he's more of a workaholic." Izuku nods. "Noted. Makes more sense. Unlike Shinsu, who seems to be stubbornly avoiding sleep, Aizawa always seems desperate to get every wink of sleep he can during class, but Izuku can deal with his sleeping problems later. "So, are we going to have to take this to him, or what?" he asks. "I would like to ask why he hasn't forced you to go back to bed when he sees you during his nightly check-ins." Shinsu leans back against the counter and yawns, cause he already knows about it. As a fellow human being with terrible sleeping habits, he's fine with my odd hours so long as I actually make some attempt to sleep, which I do, and I don't, drop dead during training. Izuku gaps at him for a moment, then clenches his jaw and crosses his arms. "Well, now, Aizawa-sensei is getting a talk," he growls, tapping his foot irritably. "Your tea is getting cold." Shinsu eyes his abandoned cup. Ignoring his statement, Izuku recollects himself and counters, "Well, recovery girl most certainly wouldn't be happy to be woken up at this hour, and she wouldn't be happy to hear that you've been hiding this problem for so long either. So, you can either go to bed now and actually try to go to sleep, or we can go see her." Honestly, Izuku is mentally shuddering at the thought of waking up his mentor for something as trivial as this. Thankfully, it seems like Shinsu isn't too keen on the idea either, if the way his lips press together is anything to go by. "Seriously?" Shinsu asks, suddenly a lot less amused. Izuku nods resolutely. "Come on, I'm just gonna end up lying awake in my bed for hours until the sun rises. Or you could get lucky and end up falling asleep," Izuku says positively. Shinsu huffs, "No, I won't. Not with that attitude, you won't." Shinsu rolls his eyes and Izuku smiles softly, putting a hand on his forearm. "You're tired. Go to sleep." The purple-haired boy stares down at him for a few moments and Izuku holds his gaze firmly. Eventually, Shinsu looks up at the ceiling with a long sigh. "Fine, whatever." He pokes Izuku's forehead. "But you go to sleep too, baggy eyes." Izuku brushes his hand away. "Yeah, I was going to." Shinsu begrudgingly bids him good night as he trudges out of the kitchen and Izuku finally returns his attention to his tea, which is unfortunately now lukewarm. He sighs. The next morning, he asks Tokoyami to tell him if he ever sees Shinsu awake in the lounge in the middle of the night. He would have asked Aizawa, but since he and Shinsu apparently have some no-sleep solidarity thing going on, He figured Tokoyami would be his best bet. The very next day after that, Tokoyami tells him that Shinsu was awake in the lounge in the middle of the night. Izuku sighs, longer and louder this time. So yeah, bad habits are hard to break. Dorm life isn't all bad though. Class 1A starts to learn nicer things about each other too, things that they didn't know before. Like, for example, the other day, Izuku learns that Todoroki likes to bake. It's later in the evening after dinner, and the Greenet has to go back down to the lounge to grab a book that he forgot. As he does, he passes by the kitchen and sees Sato and Todoroki baking or, well, attempting to, at least. Todoroki is covered in flour and seems to be rather frustrated as he mixes something in a bowl. Sato stands next to him, looking very worried. Neither of them notice him, and he doesn't want to interrupt since they're both pretty busy at the moment, so Izuku gets what he needs and leaves as quietly as he can. Then, the next day after training, Izuku has just finished taking a shower when there's a knock at his door. He goes to open it, and nearly chokes on his own spit when he sees Todoroki standing in the hallway. To Todoroki-kun. He squeaks, cursing his heart for fluttering at the sight of the boy. Damn it, be cool. They're friends, remember? Just friends. He swallows and puts on a smile. What can I do for you? Todoroki is quiet at first, then seems to steel himself and thrusts something into his hands. This is for you. Startled, Izuku looks down at what he gave him. It seems to be some sort of pastry wrapped up in a nice decorative liner. Is this a chiffon cake? Yes, Todoroki says. After a moment, he adds, it's a gift. Oh. Izuku blinks, then realization dawns on him. Oh, he sees what this is. This must be some sort of peace offering. Like an I forgive you for sticking your tongue down my throat, let's go back to being normal friends kind of gift. Of course. Oh, well, now Izuku feels kind of bad that Todoroki felt like he needed to do this. While things have been okay between them, it still gets kind of awkward when they're alone together, which is why Izuku has been determinedly avoiding every possible chance of that happening. He's been making sure to always find himself in a group setting just in case Todoroki walks in, and whenever the other boy suggests hanging out or doing something together, Izuku makes sure to either invite someone else or start talking about it loudly enough for other people to hear and invite themselves. So far, it's worked, but he supposes he does miss hanging out with Todoroki one-on-one. He just wishes there wasn't any awkward tension between them, but maybe that's his fault. Maybe it's entirely one-sided. Actually, it probably is. Todoroki clearly just wants to go back to being normal friends, and Izuku, well, he wants Todoroki to be happy. So, Izuku smiles brightly at Todoroki and says, thank you. A light flush dusts across Todoroki's cheeks and he glances away, coughing, you're welcome. He's still standing there though, watching him almost expectantly, and because Izuku is such a good friend, he decides to eat the cake he made right in front of him. So he lifts it up and takes a bite. Izuku learns that Todoroki isn't very good at baking. He forces himself to keep chewing despite the fact that the cake has almost immediately sucked out all the moisture in his mouth. It turns into a gummy, pasty mush as a sickeningly sweet flavor overwhelms Izuku's tongue. It takes everything he can not to visibly recoil. Instead, he plasters on a smile and mumbles around his mouth full of cake, it's really good. It's a disgrace to the name of baking. But God, the way Todoroki's eyes light up when Izuku says that. It's enough to make the poor Greenet feel like he's about to melt into a puddle at the ground. He doesn't notice the door to his left opening. You like it? Todoroki asks, and he sounds so hopeful, looking at Izuku as if he just hung the moon and stars. Izuku is a little confused. He doesn't really understand why being good at baking is suddenly so important to Todoroki, but, of course he'll encourage him, even if it's bad, so bad, because that's what friends do, not to mention the fact that he's far too weak a man to say no to those eyes. He manages to get out in a tight voice. All of a sudden, he becomes aware of Kaken standing a few feet away, just outside his own room. They both turn to look at him simultaneously. Kaken looks between them, then at the cake, then at Izuku's pained expression, before he bursts out laughing. Loud, abrasive, obnoxious laughter. He clutches his belly and laughs so hard that for a moment Izuku thinks he might actually piss himself. Oh my god, Kaken gasps in between laughs, tears beating at the edges of his eyes. I didn't think you'd actually fucking do it. He dissolves into another fit of cackles. Meanwhile, Izuku's confusion grows. He's not quite sure what Kaken finds so funny about the situation, but Todoroki is glaring coldly at the other boy. Maybe Kaken somehow knows that Todoroki is bad at baking and is making fun of him? That's mean. Izuku should defend Todoroki. But first he has to swallow the revolting ball of mush in his mouth. Okay, he can do this. He tries once, and nearly gags. Thank God Todoroki is too busy glaring at Kaken to notice. There's literally no way to do this without grimacing. Bracing himself, he tries again and forces the cake down his throat, shuddering at the terrible aftertaste and the strange, sticky dry feeling it leaves in his mouth. Jesus, how did Todoroki fail at baking the bad? Kaken sees his expression after he swallows the cake and laughs even harder. Eventually, he has to just turn around and stumble down the hall, still laughing his ass off as he slaps the button on the wall and disappears into the elevator a moment later. Once he's gone, Todoroki lets out a dignified huff through his nose and turns back to Izuku looking slightly disgruntled, but his eyes soften once more when they land on the freckled boy. Izuku's stomach flips. He tries to swallow, but Todoroki's disaster cake has practically sucked all the moisture out of him like a sponge. It's a great cake, he croaks, giving him a wobbly smile. Todoroki smiles back, and it's as if the sun has somehow come down from the sky and filled Izuku's heart right then and there. I'm glad. Silence falls between them, and then they're just kind of standing there, smiling at each other. Awkwardly, Izuku clears his throat. Despite Todoroki's intentions, it seems that things are still going to be weird, at least for a little while, between them. He needs to get out of here. He most certainly does not want to have to keep eating this godforsaken cake in front of Todoroki. He coughs and takes a step backwards into his room. So, I think I'm gonna finish it later, though, he rasps, neatly folding it up back into its wrapping. I kind of ate a snack after training, so I'm not super hungry right now, so. Oh, right, of course. Todoroki says, thankfully taking the hint and stepping backwards himself. But it'll be a great dessert. Izuku insists, smiling brightly. I already can't wait to eat it later. Thanks. Todoroki's eyes shine and he rubs the back of his neck almost sheepishly. It's totally not cute, Izuku tells himself firmly. You're welcome, Todoroki says. Izuku smiles one last time and nods before awkwardly kind of just retreating into his room and shutting the door. Letting out a huge sigh of relief, he drops the rest of the cursed cake on his desk before collapsing in his chair and rubbing his forehead. Sushi hops up beside him and starts sniffing it. Sush, trust me. You do not want to eat that, he mumbles. Sushi sniffs the cake for a couple more seconds before he proceeds to vomit up a hairball on it. Izuku groans. Unfortunately, that's not the only strange moment to happen with Todoroki. Izuku thought he'd be safe if he only interacted with him in group settings, but apparently even there he's in danger. It happens the night after the cake incident, just 2 days before the license exam. Class 1A has decided to host a movie night. It was mostly Ashido and Kaminari's idea, but pretty much everybody jumped on board right away, especially the more extroverted students. The only ones who protested are, of course, Ida and Ierazu, since it's a school night and the license exams are so close, but they promised to watch only one movie and it's a good, class bonding experience, plus they're all in dire need of some stress relief. So, they collectively decide to watch Shrek the Musical. As they set up the lounge for their movie night, a mischievous thought occurs to Izuku. This might be a wonderful opportunity to help Kaken and Kirishima's relationship blossom. It's been a while since he's been to a movie night, but he knows how they usually go, especially ones like this with big groups of people. The lights go off, people start cuddling, maybe some will even fall asleep against their friend's shoulder. It's perfect. Izuku grins, glancing at Kirishima and Kaken out of the corner of his eye. He just has to make sure that they sit next to each other. Turns out, it's not as hard as he thought it would be. He actually doesn't even have to do anything, because as soon as they all start gathering around to see the movie, Kaken drags Kirishima over to claim one of the couches with him and props his legs up on the redhead's lap. Izuku blinks. Well damn. He just makes it look easy. Izuku wishes he could act that confident around his crush. He and Kirishima didn't start dating behind Izuku's back, right? The thing is, he's so busy, keeping an eye on those two lovebirds, that he forgets to pay attention to who's sitting next to him. So when the couch suddenly dips beside him, he's entirely unprepared to look to his right and see Todoroki. The boy glances at him as if he just noticed him, as if he wasn't the one to come over and sit next to him, and gives him a small smile. Hi. Izuku stifles a sigh and tries not to sound too devastated as he accepts his fate. Hello. How was your training today? Todoroki asks. Izuku shrugs. It was alright, just more studying, you know. What about yours? You said yesterday that your ultimate move was coming along nicely. They chat for a couple of minutes about training and their upcoming exams, then afterwards about the movie they're about to watch. Unsurprisingly, Todoroki hasn't seen it before. Izuku, because he has the unfortunate pleasure of being friends with Kaminari and Ashido, has. Compared to their previous conversations, it's actually a bit easier, a bit smoother. Still missing some of the usual normalcy of their old conversations, but it's getting there. It gives Izuku hope. Soon, Ida loudly announces the start of the movie and tells everyone to be quiet. The lights turn off and the musical starts playing. For the first 20 minutes or so, everything is fine. As ridiculous as the movie is, Izuku quickly finds himself relaxing and laughing along with his friends. Then, Todoroki starts shifting beside him. At first, Izuku doesn't really pay attention to it, but then he notices Todoroki's arm moving out of the corner of his eye. He freezes. Todoroki is clearly trying to be subtle about it, but there's nothing subtle about the way his arm is slowly sliding over the back of the couch, nor the way he keeps repeatedly casting glances at Izuku. After nearly 30 seconds of not-so-stealthy creeping, his arm settles on the back cushion, inches away from Izuku's shoulders. The greenhead swallows, trying to steady his hammering heartbeat. Alright, no need to panic. Todoroki was probably just getting into a more comfortable position. The taller boy is now pressed slightly closer to Izuku's side, his torso almost touching the smaller's arm. Izuku would scoot away, except he made the terrible decision to sit at the end of the couch, so now he's stuck between Todoroki and the armrest. Plus, Todoroki's hand is hanging mere centimeters away on the other side of Izuku's left shoulder, so if he shifted even slightly, Todoroki would feel it. Izuku is quite literally trapped. He bites the inside of his lower lip, suddenly finding it hard to pay attention to the movie with Todoroki sitting so close to him. They're not touching, but he can still feel the heat radiating off of the boy's left side. He risks a quick glance at Todoroki's face, but he isn't looking at him, eyes locked firmly on the TV. Izuku hastily copies him, but his brain hardly processes the images moving on the screen. Nothing happens for the next 10 minutes and Izuku makes the mistake of thinking everything will be okay. He starts to relax. Then Todoroki's arm lowers around his shoulders. His brain short-circuits. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? But what? What the hell is this? What about the friendship cake? That was the friendship cake. That was supposed to make everything better. That was he thought Todoroki didn't want anything romantic, so what the hell is going on? Maybe it's the sleep deprivation, or maybe it's because he's just been a little bit too high-strung over the past few days, but he suddenly finds himself super pissed off. Making a split-second decision that he's completely fed up with Todoroki's bullshit, Izuku whips his head around and is about to give the boy a piece of his mind when something catches his eye. All across the room, his classmates are sprawled across the couches in various bunches and groups, cuddling. Yaozu and Jiro are snuggling together under a large blanket that they're sharing, with Uraraka and Asui, who are also nestled up against each other. Over on the love seat, Ida sits primly while Shinsu drapes himself across his lap like a tall, lazy cat, nearly falling off the couch as he leans his head against Kaminari's, who is sitting on the floor chatting non-stop to the purple-haired teen despite Ida repeatedly shushing him. Ashido and Sero also sit next to the blonde. The pink girl slouched between her two male friends with her arms linked with theirs. Even Kirishima has shifted so that he's resting his head against Kaken's stomach as they watch the movie, although Izuku notes that at least now Kaken is looking slightly more tense than before. But as Izuku gazes at them, he realizes something crucial. They're all getting nice and comfortable with each other because they're used to this, but Todoroki aloof, awkward, repressed Todoroki has probably never done something like this before. This is probably his first movie night ever. And even though they've been friends for a while now, Izuku knows he's still learning things when it comes to being social. He still doesn't always know quite what to do, and he sometimes gets uncomfortable with casual touches and stuff, but he's trying so hard all the time, especially now trying to make things normal again with Izuku. So of course he wants to wrap his arm around Izuku's shoulders. He's been trying so hard to make their friendship better again, and now he's watching the rest of their friends cuddle together during a class bonding activity. It makes sense that he'd see this as a way to strengthen their bond. He's like a confused puppy just trying to do his best and copy what the other dogs are doing. It's not his fault he doesn't realize that he nearly gave Izuku an aneurysm. But shit, Izuku has already whipped his head around, all ready to lay into him for being confusing, but now he has to come up with something else quick because Todoroki is looking at him. His brain scrambles for a few seconds before he does the first thing that comes to mind. He cuddles with Todoroki. Smiling nervously, he forces himself to relax against the taller boy and lowers his head to rest it on his shoulder. The scent of jasmine and vanilla fills his nose and he immediately sweat drops. Wait, fuck, this was a terrible idea, abort. Todoroki goes still for a moment, and then the arm around Izuku's shoulders tightens slightly and pulls him closer to his side. Izuku clamps his jaws shut to stifle a squeak as the butterflies threaten to escape from the pit of his stomach. There's no way Todoroki can't hear the thunderous pounding of his heartbeat. It's the only noise filling his ears right now. Everything else has faded into the background, the movie, his friends, all of his attention is on Todoroki. He's so warm, that's the first thing Izuku notices. Almost uncomfortably so, and part of him wonders if Todoroki is doing it on purpose or if he's just tired from training. He quickly finds himself sweltering in the heat. There's no escape from it either. Todoroki's left arm holds him in a loose but firm embrace. The taller boy's chest moves as he breathes, and Izuku moves with it since they're pressed so closely together. With every inhale, he can feel Todoroki's ribcage expanding, he can hear the sound of his breath, and it makes his head spin. Todoroki's arm is wrapped around his shoulders, keeping him in place, and he can feel the strength in his muscles pressing against him, and it's too much, they're too close to each other, he can't do this, he's too gay for this. God damn it, Todoroki's head turns towards him, and his breath brushes against Izuku's curls as he whispers, "Is this alright?" Izuku nearly lets out a pathetic whimper, but swallows it down at the last second. He then realizes that he's as tense as a bowstring against Todoroki. He manages to get out, forcing himself to relax once again. It's an incredibly difficult endeavor with all of his senses being hyper-focused on Todoroki. Mouth dry, he rasps, you're a bit too hot. On a number of levels, but Izuku is literally sweating right now. Oh, sorry. The stifling heat quickly simmers down to the usual warmth of Todoroki's left side and Izuku lets out a sigh of relief. Thanks, he whispers. No problem, Todoroki whispers back, then adds, sorry. Izuku shakes his head against his shoulder. After a few moments, he feels Todoroki shift slightly beneath him. His arm moves a little bit, like he wants to wrap it more around him, but he's hesitant. They're not exactly in a super comfortable position for cuddling. They're both still sitting rather upright, and Izuku can tell that his neck is going to start hurting soon if he keeps leaning against Todoroki's shoulder like this. He wants to pull away. He should pull away. This is going to end so badly for him. He thought he'd be able to get over this thing he has for Todoroki, but clearly it's going to be a lot harder than he thought. He's just going to get himself hurt or worse, make things even weirder between him and Todoroki. But friends cuddle, don't they? It wouldn't be that weird for him and Todoroki to cuddle. Everyone else is doing it. They would just be displaying their affection for each other, as friends do. And Todoroki wants to do it, so why shouldn't he? God, Izuku is so fucked. Taking a deep breath, he turns and tucks himself into Todoroki's side, curling his legs up and resting them over the other boy's thighs. He slides his head closer to his chest rather than his hard shoulder before grabbing his left arm and settling it more comfortably around his torso. The shift takes no more than 5 seconds. Izuku is nothing if not a master cuddler. When he's done, he leans back and stares resolutely at the TV despite not actually paying a lick of attention to what's on the screen. Ignoring the flush creeping up his neck, he decides that everything will be fine if he just doesn't look at Todoroki for the rest of the night. He can't be sure his heart will handle being this close to Todoroki and seeing his face mere inches from his own. The seconds that tick by feel like they last for hours. Izuku's never been so tense before in his life, but he can't be tense. He can't let Todoroki know that he's secretly freaking out because they're friends. Why would he be freaking out about cuddling? So he holds his breath instead, waiting for the other boy's reaction. It takes a lot longer than it should have for him to realize that Todoroki is the one who's not breathing. A jolt of panic hits him. Did he go too far? Todoroki feels really tense. He's not relaxed at all. He's not used to this much physical contact. Maybe this is a bit too much for him. Izuku doesn't want to make him uncomfortable. Although, Todoroki is the one that initiated the cuddling. Maybe he just needs some help then. Craning his neck, he leans up to whisper in the other boy's ear, Todoroki-kun. Relax. Todoroki's throat bobs a little as he swallows. But with a shaky exhale his muscles become less rigid, and Izuku's human pillow becomes a lot more comfortable. Smiling to himself, Izuku quickly tucks his head back under Todoroki's chin to avoid his gaze and pretends to go back to watching the movie. After a few moments, Todoroki seems to get a little bit braver and finally starts shifting to get himself in a more comfortable position. He carefully pulls Izuku against his chest before resting his head on top of his curls, letting out a soft sigh. Izuku gulps, heart feeling like it's about to jump right out of his throat, but somehow, he starts to feel a little bit braver too, and snuggles closer. Okay, sue him. Yeah, Todoroki doesn't see him in a romantic way, and probably won't ever see him in a romantic way. So this is the only chance Izuku will ever get to be held like this by him. Is he sort of taking advantage of his socially clueless and oblivious to his feelings friend? Maybe. Does he regret it? He'll find out. Not at the moment, though, because Todoroki is cute and soft and smells nice, and let it be known that Midoriya Izuku is a weak man because fuck it. Izuku closes his eyes and melts into Todoroki's warmth with a quiet sigh. He does not anticipate what happens next. The lounge is dark, the movie is playing in the background, and Izuku is enveloped in a safe, warm, and comfortable embrace, and, Well, sleep deprivation decides to come and kick him in the ass right then and there. Before he knows it, he passes out against Todoroki's chest. SHH, Bakugo-kun, stop laughing. Ha fuck, oh my fucking god, look at his face. SHH, you'll wake up Midoriya-kun. About to fucking burst into flames, Bakugo-kun. Stop teasing. All you, Midoriya-kun is so cute when he's asleep. SHH. Let's draw on his face. Don't you dare. Leave him alone, man. Guys, shut up. SHH. What? He should know better than to fall asleep in a public place. He should know better than to fall asleep on icy hot dude. Rahahahaha. SHHH. Should we wake him up? No. But he needs to go to bed. I'll take him. Hahaha wait, fuck you, no I'll take him. Hey wait. I've got him. And keep your voice down, Bakugo-kun. Fuck off. Give him here, icy hot. I said I've got him. Are they just gonna keep glaring at each other? Guys, come on, just don't wake him up. He's always so tired nowadays. Yeah. I don't think he's been sleeping too well. Poor Midoriya-kun, I'm gonna take him up to his room. Alright? Tch. If you wanna carry his heavy ass that bad, fucking go ahead then. Good night, Midoriya-kun. SHH. Good night, Midoriya-kun. Sweet dreams. God, he's so cute. Quit being fucking creepy, raccoon eyes. Alright, now off to bed with the rest of you. Boo. Izuku doesn't remember.